Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast with Mike Tagliere, and I'm Bobby Sylvester. We're on Twitter at BobbyFantasyPro and at Mike Tagliere NFL. Tags, how's it going, man?
Oh, it's good, man. I was talking to you before the podcast, and I told you that I ate some barbecue ribs, and you got really upset with me.
Yeah, that's not cool, dude. It's like, okay, when we're recording this for everyone listening at home, it's right before dinner time. Tags has to rub that in that he's sitting there eating ribs while I'm like starving to death. Dude, knock it off.
It was fantastic. Shout out to Mom. My wife went over there, picked up ribs, brought them back to me. Shout out to her. Like, seriously, they're the real MVPs of today's podcast.
So we've got two guests today. They're David Hess and Tom Federico from TeamRankings.com, where they give top-notch advice on survivor pools, pick'em contests, and betting lines. And we're going to get into all that today. Tom, David, thank you for coming on the show. How's it going, guys?
Good. How's it going with you guys?
Great. I'm very hungry now. Did that bother you guys as much as it bothered me?
I'll tell you why it bothered me. I don't know if you guys recall this, but I live in Memphis, Tennessee, Tags, and so barbecue ribs are kind of a sort of gospel of mine down here. So I'm gonna have to sample some of those, see if the Tagliere family or the in-laws, I forget what you said, can stack up with the pitmasters of Memphis.
Yeah, we've actually paid some contractors for Team Rankings in ribs.
Oh, nice. I need to make this happen. Like, can we get catering for the podcast? Is that doable?
Well, it's a true story. We've been partners with ESPN for about 10 years, and I usually take a yearly trip out to Bristol just to see everybody and say hi. And then at some point, I finally realized I just pack a giant duffel bag filled with frozen ribs from a place called the Barbecue Shop here in Memphis, one of my favorites. And I just roll in with frozen foil packs of full racks of ribs. And I swear, I think that's part of the reason why I've kept our deal with them so long.
That's a good idea. Did they let you travel with ribs?
Well, you've got to check them in, right? It's tough these days to get them on the plane.
Imagine going through the X-ray system or whatever it is, and they see a bunch of bones in there. They probably think you're carrying a dead body or something.
The hardest part is finding a freezer big enough to get these things deep frozen the night before, because the trip from Memphis to Bristol's in the middle of nowhere too. So it's a good 7 or 8 hours with the connections and the driving and stuff like that. So it's a race against time to preserve the freshness.
So last year when we did this show, guys, I don't know if you remember, but Tags was super pumped up about the Giants over the Cowboys in week 1. Can you guys from Team Rankings, can you tell us how that one turned out? Sorry, Tags.
We can't bust Tags' chops too much. I mean, obviously, it's always we have to say it all the time with users of our site, right? We are extremely wrong on lots of picks. It's just the way it goes, right? Especially one game is always going to be one game, and I think that was a pretty close one. I don't remember what exactly the line was. Tags, do you remember on that week 1 game between the Giants and the Cowboys last year?
It was ugly. What I do know is that I don't remember. So here's my recollection of what happened. Is that Odell Beckham? I don't know if I knew Beckham was going to be out for that game when everything took place. I think I was assuming he was playing, and that obviously affected. The Giants scored 3 points that game. I mean, so it was the Cowboys that won that game 19-3.
You also didn't know their offensive line was going to be the worst offensive line ever. You remember that game? They let up 50 sacks.
It was ugly, man. And I was made to feel like an idiot that day.
Well, I did listen to the podcast again today just to kind of get the juices flowing for this one. And the quote I pulled out was you about the Giants. I think they are only taking steps forward this year.
I thought the same thing, though, man. I've got to admit I was on Tag's side for that one. There's going to be a lot of wrong picks, and obviously, right? I'm looking at what you guys are projecting for week 1, and everything is between 50.1% and 58.5%. So it's just a matter of playing the volume on the right calls, and if you play it 100 times, you probably get 56, 57%, and that's going to win you money, but you're going to be wrong 42% of the time. Do you get a lot of stuff in customer service with people saying dude, you guys are wrong 42% of the time?
Yeah. I mean, I think anyone who is betting the NFL, especially a sport that's as popular as the NFL and, gets as widely covered as the NFL, it's a lot of times, arguably one of the most efficient sports in terms of betting lines. They understand that, you just can't expect to go 70% long term against the lines. I mean, the best professional bettors and syndicates aren't winning at that rate. And it's kind of a cat and mouse game too, though. But because NFL is such a heavily bet sport, it's one of the most liquid betting markets in the world, and so it's great in that you have the possibility of being able to get more money down on NFL games, especially closer to game time than in other sports. But it's again arguably one of the more efficient markets. So it's just an interesting situation. I think our site caters to certainly more of the sort of sophisticated. Obviously, it's all about data and analytics, and so the type of people that we attract to our site, I think, are aware of the risks, and they just want to make the best educated decision, right, that they can. And, not so much like the 900 number handicapper kind of, what have you done for me lately? But, like everybody else, we run hot and cold. Absolutely. And, last year we did not have a great NFL season. Other seasons we do, with on the order of 275 games or so per season. And even your best picks, you have a subset of your top picks with something like 55% confidence or 55 to 60%. Variance alone, a good model could easily have a losing NFL season. You just have to be prepared for that.
Sure. I remember you guys dominating the past 2 years in March Madness. I won a fair amount of money with that.
Yeah, March Madness has been good the past couple of years, and we had a really good year last year with football pool picks as well. So we send out surveys at the end of the year to all our subscribers, and we ask them a bunch of stuff about how they used our picks and their performance in real world pools. Because as far as we know, we're the only site that actually we collect data when we customize picks for someone's football pool, whether it's a survivor pool or a pick'em contest. We ask for data about the actual pool that the customer's playing in.
Because the contest settings mean everything. You have to change your strategy based on that.
So we know how many people they're playing against, how many entries are in the pool. We know the rules of the pool because we're taking that data as an input and then feeding back customized picks to them to give them the biggest edge. And so, we actually collect real world data on, we ask them, how'd you do in this pool? Where'd you finish? Did you win a prize? This and that. And so last year, our survey respondents reported that they won over $1 million in NFL survivor pool prizes. And so, we have a lot of customers who are pretty serious players. They may be playing 10 or 20 entries in a pool, but they're playing for the big prizes, and a lot of them delivered last year. And then on the pick'em side, 81% of our survey respondents reported that they won either at least one weekly prize or an end of season prize in their pick'em contest at the end of the year. So
81%? That's not normal, is it?
I mean, it tends to be pretty binary, right? I mean, you have same thing with March Madness though. We have a great year with our picks, and obviously a very high percentage of our customers win a lot of money. You don't have a great year with the picks, and not many people win money.
Well, one of the good things about the pick'em picks, though, is that the weekly picks, it's kind of like 15 different years, right? Like every week is a new contest. So even if it's a bad season overall, a lot of times you'll still pick up a weekly win or two. So I think we've been doing the pick'em picks for 4 years now that we've been running the survey, and the worst year so far is about 60% of customers won a prize. So yeah, I think the weekly picks are a big part of that. Like if you're in a pool with those, it gives you a real good shot to at least break even if it's a bad year on the one weekly win.
So I'm pretty sure everyone in the industry, and especially you guys, have to be pumped about the SCOTUS ruling, that Supreme Court of the United States. How does this impact sports betting? What is the future going to hold here, guys?
I won't say your guess is as good as mine. Maybe it's not quite as good as mine, since I spent right after the ruling, I kind of spent a couple weeks on the phone talking to everybody I could, and it was anticipated, I would say, right? It was kind of funny that the SCOTUS ruling this year, because I almost got the sense that people were discounting it before it happened. There was less chatter than I thought there would be, given that I think there were some betting market odds on it, or at least the quote unquote experts I talked to in the legal field were giving it about a 70 to 80% chance of the PASPA being struck down and sports betting being able to be legalized on a state by state basis. But then it happened, and there was just this huge, reaction, hubbub about it. And all of a sudden, all these bigger companies were talking about how they're going to get into the space and this and that. I mean, I guess that's natural, in that, they can't really probably say anything about it until it's sort of officially an option for them. But I do think it's going to be slow. We've seen that already. We've got 3 states, I believe, up so far, and
so it's going state by state. It's not like every single state you're going to be allowed to do it.
Yeah. And it's not like when each state starts it that online betting is going to be available too. Like, I'm 5 miles from the Mississippi border, and when Mississippi went, it was like 2 casinos, right, land based, and you have to drive there and place your bet. And so I think it's to me, I think it's going to be a 3 to 5 year type deal before the majority of states get it. The interesting question to me is kind of what's it going to do to the sports betting market in the U.S. in general, because obviously a huge amount of it happens underground now. It's not like there's no sports betting market in the U.S. as you guys know. There are definitely theories saying that, you've seen some of the lines. I know DraftKings was kind of getting savaged on Twitter because the vig that they put up on their bets in New Jersey, online betting in New Jersey was, seems to be pretty high. And, it's a question of, hey, are people going to still bet if sort of at least in the beginning, the payout odds are bad? If they're already betting offshore, are they going to move that betting volume to legal channels if it's sort of more expensive for them to bet through legal channels?
It also seems a little scary, like it might chase away new people if they're, constantly losing at the beginning because the VIGs are so high. By the way, can you explain to our listeners what that means?
Yeah, I mean, essentially the sportsbook takes a commission to take your bet, right? You'll have to bet $11 to win 10 on the premise of, roughly a 50-50 chance of winning if the lines are efficient, right? So there's a transaction. It's like buying a stock, right? You're going to pay Charles Schwab $5 for the commission. Although, it's, that's sort of the general idea. It's certainly been that way forever. But, obviously the more competition there's going to be in the market, typically it'll price those, push those commissions down. Right now, there aren't many operators, and so the ones that are operating are sort of have, they have license to at least test, very high kind of commissions, if you will, because they're the only option in town in certain places. So I think that will change. I think the interesting question, maybe quite frankly, for companies like us is just how quickly is the betting market going to grow in the U.S. And, there's a kind of a contrarian explanation for us, and that's, there's been so much excitement about the legalization that, more companies are getting into the space, more sites are launching that have to do with, betting information and analytics. And in the immediate term, I actually don't think the overall market is going to grow that fast, right? It wasn't like DFS. Like when sort of DFS came of age, it was national from day one. And you had companies like DraftKings and FanDuel, raising hundreds of millions of dollars and immediately putting it into national ad campaigns. And every TV ad was a DFS ad. That can't happen with sports betting. It's not going to be that overnight rollout, market explosion. But yet there's going to be lots of people kind of competing for the pie now. So, it's going to be a long-term type proposition, I think, both for individual bettors and for companies looking to get into the market.
All right, guys. Well, here's what we have planned for today. We're going to first start with survivor pool strategy, then go on to pick'em contest strategy. We're going to make some NFL projections for 2018, then do a quick run through of our top picks for week 1. So let's start here at the football pool strategy. Why should you play pools? Like, what's the difference really between this and fantasy football?
Yeah, I think the main point about playing pools and fantasy actually have some similarities, right? The biggest similarity is that you're playing against other players, right? Other humans who are biased, and not against like a house or a sports book that's going to take essentially a commission, sort of charge you a fee to just to play. And so that opens up, a fair amount of edge right there, just because not everyone is a sharp player. Not everyone's going to be as sharp as a sports book is, setting lines and stuff like that, the equivalent in betting. But I think, quite frankly, the other part of this, and David might have some insight to shed here as well, but is, I get this. After doing this for years, we kind of started with March Madness bracket picks, and that was back in the early 2000s. I just get the sense that even though pools are a really big market, we're talking about tens of millions of people. If you look at, the people playing on ESPN and Yahoo who are playing in these things every year, and we got to, honestly, obviously most of these are having, there are prize pools associated and entry fees with the pools. Like compared to fantasy, I just really get the sense that people just don't put that much time into figuring out their optimal strategy. Like you'll get the same person.
I think there's better odds there because everyone's super hardcore about fantasy football, right? And everyone's writing about fantasy football, but not as many people are writing about this. So I think it's a good investment. Plus, it's a lot of fun. It's a different type of strategy. I love doing the pools.
Yeah, I mean, the same guy that's going to spend, 10 hours a week on Fantasy Pros, like figuring out who he's going to start and sit, this week, might spend 15 or 20 minutes trying to figure out what his pool picks are going to be that week. And the reality is the complexity involved in kind of figuring out the optimal strategy could well be, higher than, just figuring out who he should start or sit on his team that week. And so there, you can really get a big edge as a result. I mean, our estimates, as David was saying, like our customers are winning, weekly prizes in football pools. Worst year, like 60% of them won a prize. I mean, just kind of blowing away the baseline expectations for how often you should win pools. And it's a niche that we've focused on it just because it really is a niche with a lot of opportunity. And if you're going to play a game, right? If you're going to put money on something, you want to find the most inefficient market to play in, and we really think that that's pools.
Interesting. Okay. So let's move on over and talk about survivor pool strategy. How do you get an edge in these survivor pool strategies? Like, aren't most people approaching it the same way? Do you go with the chalk? Is there some kind of strategy that a lot of people don't realize?
Well, I think it depends on what level of player you're talking about, obviously. But the general public, I think, just looks at, I want to survive the week. I want to survive a few more weeks. That's about all they think about. They want to pick a safe team this week. And maybe, hopefully not the Patriots, because they want to use the Patriots later. They're not planning out their whole season. Oh, I'm going to use this team in week 15, this team in week 16. I need to save them for later. So that's one area where you can gain an edge, is taking into account future value better than your opponents. I think that one, though, intermediate players understand that, and they plan out the whole season.
You actually plan out the entire season? Because, obviously injuries are going to play a big factor. Like if Tom Brady was to go down, well, maybe that's a bad example because their backup quarterbacks are always awesome. But if Aaron Rodgers was to go down, maybe we have the Packers projected for 9-10 wins. Obviously, they're not a very good NFL team without Rodgers. So how much do you actually put stock into the confidence of, teams like the Packers?
That's a good question. Yeah, I said plan out the whole season because I think that's what some intermediate players do. They map out their whole season, and then that creates their pick this week. What we actually do is, we don't really plan out a full season for every pick set that we recommend, but we essentially give every team a future value rating, and it tells us how important it is to save them for later. We do have a tool on the site that you can plug in the picks that you've made previously and click a button. It'll show you the path that will get you the highest % chance to survive for the rest of the year for that entry, by assuming that our projected win odds in future weeks are accurate, which, is not, they're going to be relatively accurate, but they're not set in stone, right? So using that tool is kind of a research tool for you. It's not a gospel for what you should do. Our main pick suggestions, actually, I guess let's take a step back first. Besides the future value, the other angle that you need to look at that a lot of people don't is popularity. How many people in your pool are picking this team? If you survive, how many other people are going to survive with you? If you pick the biggest favorite of the week and 40% of the pool is picking them, and you're correct, so are 40% of your opponents. So you didn't really gain any ground on them, right? If you pick a team with 5% lower win odds and no one else in the pool picked them, that's better generally because no one else is advancing with you. They still have to get their pick correct. So you stand a chance of that 40% popularity team losing and a huge chunk of the pool getting knocked out, and you being, going along with only half the pool instead of the whole pool. So those are the two main areas where you can gain an edge, is taking into account future value and taking into account pick percentage.
So we did an article on Fantasy Pros this season where we refer to as kind of the holy trinity of survivor pool strategy data, right? There's win odds, safety, there's pick popularity, and there's future value. And so, those are the three things that you need to sort of the three data points to make the smartest pick every week. Now, there's a lot of math that you have to now incorporate once you have those data points to figure out what your actual best pick is. And by the way, not only your best pick, because a lot of our subscribers especially are playing multiple entries either in the same pool or across multiple pools. And so there's a second optimization step, which is, okay, I know kind of who my best ranked picks are this week, but if I have to split 10 picks over 10 entries in 3 pools, what's the best way to do that? That's a whole other beast that we do. But the main point is here, I think, the basic players really only care about safety. They're only looking at win odds. They've got blinders on. They think their best strategy is just to maximize their odds of surviving the week, and sort of they'll figure it all out later.
Then by the end of the season, you have to use the Bears. I'm just kidding, Tags. I'm just messing, man.
Oh, stop it, Bobby. It's a shot.
A lot of that I think is psychology too, right? Like, no one wants to lose early and say like, I was the guy that lost in week 2 of my survivor pool, and the shame that comes with it. But as David said, the intermediate players kind of have a sense of, oh yeah, like picking an unpopular team, all else being equal, is better than picking a popular team, and saving a team that's good is better than, burning that team now. They have a sense of those things. But the expert players, like to really maximize your edge, you just have a very precise understanding. Like, we're building models to quantitatively assess what a team's future value is. And that future value is a great example. There's so many dimensions to it. It's not just it's better to save a good team for later. You might have a good team that actually has less future value than you think, because the weeks where they happen to have juicy matchups in the future, in those, let's say, it's Team X and week, they're a great team and they have juicy matchups in week 10 and week 15. Well, if it turns out that, there are just lots of other great alternatives to pick in those 2 weeks, then they're actually probably don't have as much future value as you think they do. And yet everyone else might be saying, oh, I got to save the Saints for, kind of week X or week Z. But there might be 3 or 4 other like legitimate options for that week. And you get to that week and it turns out, oh man, I actually could have burned them for, and I'd be fine.
Essentially, yeah, you can use the Saints like, I don't know, 40% of weeks and they'd be a good call. So you could use them in week 9 when there are no other good options.
Yeah. So that's a big part of the strategy. And, a lot of people just don't, well, it's not only that they don't understand it, it's just like they don't just kind of have the analytics chops to just process that data and figure out, what to do with it.
Or they don't build algorithms on their own. So it makes sense to rely on somebody who spends their entire time building algorithms for this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was thinking about fantasy versus pools again as David was talking. And, I really do think that I made a comment, I think, in the notes for this podcast that, fantasy is kind of all about matchups, and it's very logical, sort of qualitative. Hey, I've got these 2 players. I got to sit one and start the other. And, well, how good are their matchups this week? And, I can, one's playing against a terrible defense, one's playing against a great defense. Well, there's sort of, I get a good sense of kind of what's my answer. All this pool stuff, it's literally just math, right? The edge that you're going to get from, having a slightly better projection of what are the Saints' odds to win in week 1, versus someone else. Like, there's a little bit of edge there, but there's a huge amount of edge in figuring out like the expected value of using them based on the pick popularity of all the teams in the pool this week, and really quantifying their future value precisely to the point where you're taking into account not only how good they are, but but pick popularity projections for every future week, which is what we do as well, right? That's where you're going to get the lion's share of your edge, and there's hardly anyone out there who kind of is doing it at that level.
And then the step after that of optimizing your 10 entry portfolio to put the right teams on the right entries to preserve your options later in the year.
Is there a big advantage to playing multiple entries? Like,
one thing you got to take into account when you're talking about football pools is, they only happen once a year, right? And so, if there were survivor pools like literally starting every day for the entire year, just like a fresh crop and running all year, we would be in heaven, right? I would just be taking all my money out of the stock market and playing in as many pools as I can. But the reality of pools is, even with a huge edge, you're not gonna win more than every once in a while, right? It's if you have 100 people in a pool, kind of your baseline odds to win the pool are 1%, right? If everyone's sort of an average picker, you're expected to win that pool once every century. And a lot of people don't like to sort of face that reality. Like that's the expectation, right? And so, maybe you're 5 times as good as the average person. Now you're expected to win it once every 20 years. Now, five times as good is like, it's a ridiculously amazing edge. Like it's all, that's like at the highest sort of range of kind of what we think that we can get customers in certain types of pools. And it's still once every 20 years. The reality is if you're playing like that and you play for the long term, your profits on your entry fees in these pools are still going to be amazing, right? It's like make Warren Buffett jealous returns that you're going to make, but you got to be committed to the long term. So the way to kind of, change that equation a little bit is by playing multiple entries, right? The more entries you play, it just gives you a more realistic chance to sort of taste the sweetness of victory in a pool more often than once every 20 years, let's say, right? You do give up a little bit of edge, right? If you think about it theoretically, there's probably, one survivor pick that is quote unquote your best pick for your pool in a given week. And if you are playing enough entries that, you're going to play, let's say it's the same. We have our survivor pick pool product launches tomorrow. So I actually don't know the answer to this question yet, but let's just say it's the Saints. That, if you're playing 1 entry, maybe the recommendation would be 1 Saints. If you're playing 2 entries, maybe it would be 2 Saints. If you're playing 3 entries, just for the heck of it, let's say it goes to 2 Saints and 1 Patriots or something. The Patriots aren't theoretically your best pick, so you're kind of taking a little bit of a step down in expected profits by not only picking the Saints. But at the same time, you're getting the insurance that if the Saints do lose, like you're still in the pool, you still have a chance to win something that year. So that's the trade-off you make by playing multiple entries.
Yeah, Bobby, it's kind of like, it's just like multiple DFS lineups where it's like if you're putting together, 20 different lineups, there's going to be some losers in there, but the idea is to give yourself a better chance. And, I love talking to these guys because like last year it kind of opened up my mind to what it is they do and the ways you could take advantage of that and make some money. And like if you're in an office pool or something like that with people, it's the easiest thing. My brother-in-law, he's in one, and he told me, he's like, hey, just want to split it with me? And I said, yeah, of course. So we went to Team Rankings, used you guys in terms of like the weekly picks, and it customized it for it's 20 people in his work thing. So it was able to give me picks based just on that. And it was but the more you do, the better chances you'll have, because then honestly, the more chances you have to find the dummies out there who are playing just for fun. You know what I mean? Especially if you do.
There's a lot more of them in office pools too than there is in fantasy football. Because fantasy football seems intimidating. This is like, oh, you just make a couple picks. You know what I mean? But
yeah, and I'd say brackets is definitely more casual even than fantasy football. Those are you want to get in as many bracket pools if you know how to play sharp.
Do you submit like 15,000 personal brackets yourself?
The irony of this whole thing is like I'm still just in like typically entering one pool with like my my buddies from college and stuff like that. If I have, it's such a crush for us right around March Madness. It's like at 4 a.m. on Thursday morning. If I have like 5 minutes left, David enters a lot more than I do. Quite frankly, he's
I probably do 20 to 30 entries a year over 5 to 10 pools. Just depends on what's available to me that year. But yeah, same thing with Tom. Like I don't have time to do this until shortly before the tournament. So sometimes I don't get into all the pools I want to.
We'll say that if we're to sum up kind of that one more important point about survivor pools before we move on, it's just that survivors especially, that psychological hurdle of being able to be comfortable with taking a greater risk to be eliminated very early on in order for the opportunity to potentially make an unpopular contrarian pick and have the chance for a lot of your pool to be eliminated early on while you survive. It is really what separates the men from the boys and the women from the girls in terms of survivor pool. It's over just being completely okay with saying, hey, this opportunity in week 3 could be the best opportunity I get the entire season, to take a contrarian position with a really high expected payout. I just need to be comfortable with there being a 5% or a 10% higher chance that I'm going to be eliminated in week 2 or week 3 or week 4, and everyone's going to laugh at me. If you want to play sharp, you have to get over that hurdle, and you have to be okay with that.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's a lot easier to not be made fun of when there's like 150 people playing and nobody even notices when 15 people go out. Because you don't you're not by yourself.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's talk about NFL Pick'em contest. Can you guys explain like what these are? Because there's surely some people listening to this podcast who, didn't really realize about survivor pools. Maybe they'd never played in one like that, or the detail of it. What are these pick'em contests?
Yeah, I mean, I think survivor pools, kind of where you typically pick one team a week, and if the team loses, you're out of the pool, have become a lot more popular in the last 3 to 5 years. We're seeing more and more interest, our own subscriber numbers, and just coverage in generally kind of in the media, and just people talking about survivor picks and how to make them. I think it's been a fairly recent phenomenon that they've achieved much greater popularity, but pick'em contests are kind of the granddaddy of them all. So there are lots of different flavors. The typical one is just kind of you're picking every NFL game every week, and you're getting 1 point if you get the pick right, and whoever has the most points at the end of the season wins. And our pick'em product, and from a picks perspective, covers a bunch of different flavors of these pools. Like some people pick against the spread instead of picking straight up winners. Some people have weekly prizes, as we were talking about earlier in the podcast, as well as end of season prizes. And, all these kind of rule variants. Confidence points is obviously the other big one, right? Where you have to assign, not only pick all 6 games, all 16 or 13 games whenever there are buys, but, assign a confidence value of 16 down to 1 on every pick. And that's the number of points you get if you get the pick right. All these sort of dynamics greatly change your optimal strategy. And again, that's another area where a lot of people just don't get that. And they don't put enough time into thinking through, kind of how their pick strategy should reflect the rules of their pool. In Pick'em specifically, I think the biggest surprise for people when they use our site, and we alluded to this earlier, is your strategy if you want to win a weekly prize in your pool versus a end of season prize. Most people kind of just take the blind assumption that those picks should kind of be the same. Like you should just pick the winners in every game, right? Right. Well, my best picks, they're going to be the picks that are most likely to win. And if I'm like, they should be no different if my goal is to win a weekly prize versus a season prize. And it's incredible how wrong that is, especially if you're in a large pool with lots of players. Because as David said earlier, when there's a prize awarded in a weekly pool, you have to not only assuming like everyone who, if you kind of tie for first with everybody, you split the pot, for example, that you not only need to look at kind of what are your odds to come in first, you got to look at kind of what's the payout if you do come in first. And then you also have to, so there are kind of two dimensions there. David actually probably is a good one to kind of explain the perspective here. Yeah, I mean, the basic idea is just if you want to get the most picks correct possible, you pick all the projected favorites, right? That's the easy way to do it. But the point of a weekly prize is not to maximize your average score. It's to come out ahead of more people in your pool. And the way you do that is similar to how we were talking in Survivor. You need to take some risks by picking unpopular teams. In smaller pools, say 25 people or so, the way that ends up playing out is every week there's going to be a handful of games that are pretty close to toss-ups, right? Usually in the NFL, there are some games where the favored team is going to win 55% of the time, 53% of the time. They're not massive favorites. Usually the public comes down on one side or the other, and they're picking one of those teams much more than 50% of the time. They're picking, the team that's favored by 2, they're picking that team 70% of the time, and the underdog only 30% of the time. So if you're in a weekly pool, the best strategy is generally going to be to pick that slight underdog that's unpopular. So if it's basically a coin flip, you want to be on the side of the coin that has less people, so that if you get the coin flip correct, you're splitting the pot with fewer people, and you're gaining an edge over more of the pool. Because essentially you need to assume that a few people in this pool are going to get lucky and make some correct underdog picks, and so you probably need to get lucky and make some correct underdog picks too. So the ones that you want to make are the ones that isolate you from the rest of the pool and get you alone in first place, or get you splitting the pot with fewer people, or entering the tiebreaker with fewer people. And in a giant pool, you end up taking risks on games that aren't even coin flips because, if it's a pool with 500 people in it,
there's going to be some crazy picks that end up being correct, and so you're going to have to make some crazy picks if you want to win a weekly prize in that pool.
Does strategy change late into seasons? Like, if you're out of the money, should you just always go for the weekly prize? Is there really much of a chance to get back in? And what about if you're like close to the money? How do you pick conservatively, or are you aggressively?
Yeah, a lot of people, their pool only has either season or weekly prizes, so you don't have to make that option. But if you have both of them, that is a question that you need to figure out when you're making your picks, and we do that for you. We calculate the expected value of going for a season prize and the expected value of going for a weekly prize, and we do the calculation for you and suggest, you're still close to the money, we think you should try to go for the season prize, you still have a shot, or you're doing terrible, you should make these picks that are geared towards a weekly prize instead.
That's a great question though, Bobby, because if you especially, it's really relevant right now at the start of pools, because a lot of times you also have to make some of these decisions kind of right off the bat, right? Because the strategy to win weekly prizes is much different than to win season prizes. Especially in big pools, you're making a lot more risky picks. So effectively, if you were to start out just kind of going after weekly prizes, one of the immediate impacts is you're pretty much going to take yourself out of contention for a season prize in a bigger pool, because most of the time those picks that you're making to try to win a weekly prize are going to be really risky. They're going to do really poorly. You're just it's kind of home run ball, right? It's Sammy Sosa. You're going to take 17 swings at it and hope you're going to get one or two, and that would be a great profit.
Yeah, it's like a GPP lineup instead of a head-to-head, right? Is that I don't play at DFS anymore, but that's the analogy.
So right off the bat on the pool, you kind of have to look at your prize structure and say, well, hey, if the weekly prize is $20 a week for, and then the season prize, let's say the entire season prize is only $100, like it's probably going to be worth your while, depending how many people are in the pool and stuff, and probably be worth your while to just go after season prizes weekly prizes, and give up on the season prize from the beginning. But if you don't do that, let's say your pool has both season and weekly prizes, you can kind of start out going for a season prize. If let's say the season prize is much, much bigger than sort of the sum of the weekly prizes, and then kind of reassess as you go. If there are just some people that have gotten incredibly lucky with their picks in your pool by week 10 or 13 or whatever, and you can conclude that you basically have no chance of catching them. They just had a ridiculous lights out year, even though you're doing well, they're just doing unbelievable. Then you can give up on that. Like David said, we're kind of watching those calculations for you and just switch to try to salvage hopefully one weekly prize before the season's over. And then, or quite frankly, or you can just change your season prize strategy, right? And get a little bit more aggressive. I think one thing that happens to a lot of people is they get toward the end of a season prize pool, and they might not be in the money, but they might be close. And they don't realize that, in order to have any chance of trying to crack into the money and cash in the pool, they're going to have to start making a lot more aggressive picks than they are, right? Because if you kind of think rationally, think the leaders of the pool are going to act rationally, they're mostly going to be picking favorites in the closing weeks to try to defend their lead. If it's either catch them or win nothing, then you have to be more aggressive. You have to pick opposite than them on multiple games to make up the points that you need to catch them in the standings and actually cash. And so what we see is people just not being nearly as, if your pool, say, only has a season prize and you're just outside the money in the last couple of weeks, people are still kind of picking, somewhat conservatively when they should be completely changing their strategy and just kind of going for it, because, it's the illusion of thinking you have some chance to win where you really don't, unless you get a lot more aggressive.
So from what I understand, what we're looking for, and I'm learning as much as, the people listening to this podcast, that's why we have Team Rankings on, is to learn about these things, right? Because we're not the experts in this realm of sports. So from what I understand, we're looking for teams that are undervalued or avoiding teams that are overvalued. So like for week 1, are there any upset picks that we should be avoiding or looking out for?
Yeah, I was just going to tell you that. It's always good to sort of provide examples here. So Miami versus Tennessee is a great example I had kind of circled before the podcast here. Miami's looks like a 1-point underdog right now.
Ooh, that's it, man. I would have thought Tennessee would blow them out of the water
right now. So looking at the numbers, we pulled pick popularity data from kind of variety of different sources, but basically they've got close to a 50-50 shot according to the Vegas line, right, to beat Tennessee. These numbers, the popularity numbers could change a little bit over the course of the week as more and more people actually make their picks. But right now it looks like close to 20% of the public is picking Miami, right? So you've got roughly 50-50 win odds and only 20% popularity. So I would say, from a game theory perspective, Miami is a pick that most pool players, not all. I mean, there's still a case to be made that if you're in a small pool with only a season-long prize, that you should be ultra conservative, especially in the early weeks, and really just take the favorites until kind of you can reassess later. But for a lot of bigger pools, especially even ones with just season prizes, Miami would be a team that you should seriously consider. And moving to a no-brainer pick in weekly pick pools for especially larger pools, like it would just be foolish to pick a team like Tennessee in most weekly prize pools if those popularity and win odds numbers hold. And then, so now the next example would be, kind of a pick which you wouldn't consider making in a season pick pool just because it's too risky. But in a weekly pick pool, you should. Cleveland versus Pittsburgh fits that mold pretty well. It looks like Pittsburgh's a 5.5 point favorite right now. And Cleveland's win odds, that translates to roughly low 30% win odds. Let's call it 32%.
It's a lot higher than most people would probably think, right?
Yeah, I mean, people tend to polarize sort of the games where they sort of overestimate the favorite and underestimate the underdog. And I think obviously given Cleveland's recent history, that people are going to be much more prone to do that in this game with Cleveland. But only 10% of the public as of now is picking Cleveland to win that game. And I mean, you have to trust, even if you forget team rankings, even if you just look at the betting markets, the Vegas numbers, right? I mean, they're a 5.5 point underdog. It's less than a touchdown, and only 10% of the public, 90% of people are thinking that Pittsburgh's going to win the game. That is not in sort of an efficient breakdown there, right? So if you are in a season prize pick'em contest, I think you would very rarely, if ever, consider picking Cleveland in that game. They're just too risky. Even going by the Vegas odds, Pittsburgh has close to a 70% chance to win the game, and it's very early in the pool. But if you're in a weekly pool and the slate's going to be wiped clean next week, and you're playing against 500 people in that pool or 1,000 people in the pool, you would seriously consider picking Cleveland given the value.
So guys, let's make some NFL projections. I've been waiting for this because this is my bread and butter. This is my kind of thing that I just love doing. Now, you said you listened to the show earlier today. Can you remind us, did anyone say anything super foolish? Did anyone make a great prediction or anything?
I did, and we were good. I mean, I think there were kind of three teams that stuck out to me in my notes. And I think all the way around, both Fantasy Pros and Team Rankings did pretty well here. So both of us were high on the Patriots. I mean, okay, go out on a limb, right? But I think that, there were, a couple things there though. I think, we both came out, and I think David made a point, if you're not picking the Patriots to win the division, I think it was, maybe it was conference, so it was absolute division, then you're doing it wrong. And then, Tags thought absolutely agree. And then I think we had them at 93 or 94% odds to win the division. And David even said that feels low to me. Well, but then we had the little twist, right? The season opening game where Kansas City just embarrassed them. And so, it was kind of looking a little shaky at the beginning then, but it all came through in the end. I mean, so that was good. We were both really high on New England. They made the Super Bowl. Bobby, you were super high on Jacksonville. That was kind of your contrarian pick there. You were much more optimistic on their chances than us, and that was obviously a great call. And then our call was Carolina. We thought that Carolina was going to pick it up again last year and was likely to actually finish a little bit ahead of Atlanta, which was a contrarian viewpoint back then, and that ended up happening as well. And so, yeah, it was kind of good across the board. So, yeah, pats on the back all around.
Well, let's do it again this year, Tags. I'm going to let you start, man. What is your, maybe 2 or 3 calls?
Well, that's the thing. So I noticed I wanted to talk about the Bears here because obviously I'm high on them and with all the additions they've made, but you guys haven't projected it's 6.7 wins and 9.3 losses. So essentially I went through it and looked, and there's only 4 teams. So basically the Bears are projected to have the 5th pick in the NFL draft next year, which, by the way, they don't have because they traded away for Khalil Mack.
Oh man, that'd be horrible for you.
Now these projections, right. So the Bears, by doing that and by giving the contract that they did during Trubisky's rookie contract, the Bears are basically telling their players that we're going for it now. We're trying to make the playoffs now. And I believe the talent's in the roster obviously rests on Mitch Trubisky's shoulders. Can he handle the Matt Nagy offense? But
I think it's all Matt Nagy, man. I don't think it matters as much about Trubisky. You could put
he controls it.
Brock Osweiler out there with Nagy and he'd be fine.
Oh, get out of here. Now you're trying to underestimate the talent level.
No, I'm saying Nagy is really good, man.
Well, we haven't seen him as a coach yet, but what led you guys to say 6.7 wins for the Bears? Because that one, I don't see even how the Lions would finish with more wins than they do this year. I could see Green Bay and Minnesota, though.
Well, to start off, I should mention that the projections that you looked at are from before the Mac trade. So they will rise a little bit. I have a newborn son. He's 11 days old, so I haven't been keeping my eye on the news as closely as I normally do. But
I meant to tell you guys that David literally just came off paid family leave 6 minutes before the
wow,
podcast.
That's awesome.
So they will get bumped up a little bit, but I think they're still going to be below where you see them based on what you're saying there. And looking at our data, the basic deal with them is so we start out with kind of a baseline for each team that takes into account how they performed the past few years. Like the previous season is weighted highest, but there is some impact of the two before that. And their baseline, just looking at team ratings from the past couple years and ignoring everything else, would put Chicago at about 24th. So, then you need to look at the other things in our model. The most important things in our model are maturing draft classes. So we look at basically the draft classes from 3 and 4 drafts ago end up generally being the most predictive of team success. So we have a little point system where, the first few picks are worth 5 points and it goes down to a 3rd round pick is worth 1 point. And the average team in an average draft gets 6.5 points in the draft worth of players.
How does it factor in free agents like Trey Burton, Allen Robinson, all these guys that they just went and brought in?
Their entire offense, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that we factor in free agency is after we do our model, we take a look at how our projections compare to the Vegas lines, and we see if there are huge discrepancies. And if there are, we adjust the ratings towards the market. In Chicago's place, we're really pretty close to in line with what the market was when I made these projections. It's changed since then because of the Mac trade, and I will be adjusting them sometime in the next couple of days. But at the time, I think the line was it was over 6.5 wins minus 138 and under 6.5 plus 116 at the time I did this, and our projections had the under with about 5% ROI, which it's a little bit of a stand, but it's not a big stand. It was pretty close to the market. So the big negatives for them are turnover luck and the quarterback. So turnover luck, I think that's become pretty common knowledge now in analytics circles and people that pay attention to stats, that turnovers are in large part random, and a team that has a ton of turnovers will regress to the mean a little bit and they should improve, all else being equal. A team that doesn't turn it over very much was lucky and they should get worse. But we go beyond just looking at the turnover margin and we break it down by the type of turnover, like interceptions thrown, interceptions caught, forced fumbles lost, all the different aspects of turnovers. And what we found is that by far the biggest regression happens to opponent fumbles recovered. And Chicago was tied for most opponent fumbles recovered per game last year, and so that is essentially what's driving their low rating in terms of turnover luck. That's an adjustment to their rating that we're making because of the turnover regression. But the quarterback part, Trubisky's not great, right? So we make some rookie quarterback projections for people that haven't played before, and we had him projected with a QB rating of 81. Looks like it ended up being 77.5 according to my notes. And so, they're projected with a quarterback rating of about 80 this year for the season. The baseline ratings for their team involve the past couple of years when they had Cutler playing a big chunk of that, and Brian Hoyer and Barkley. And so Trubisky is projected to be worse than what they've had in that baseline rating the past few years. And so the baseline rating was 24th with worse QB play. That's knocking them down a couple spots. Good turnover luck last year is knocking them down a couple spots. Like I said, they'll be adjusted up some once I look into the Mac trade and how much value I think that'll add.
I think it's no secret that Tags and I have been pretty excited about this offense with Nagy coming to town. And,
yeah, for sure.
Allen Robinson, Trey Burton. So I'm higher on the Bears as well. The two that stood out to me, I'm a big Jags fan. But with that said, I don't think they're going to win the division. I've got the Titans winning that division in the AFC South. I think they've made some big changes, and I'm excited to see what they do this season. And then Arizona, you guys have them at 7.1 wins. Now, they won 8 last year without David Johnson. They really improved at quarterback from Drew Stanton to Sam Bradford. And Sam Bradford, he's not great or anything, but he's a lot better than Drew Stanton. So I don't think they're going to pass up the Rams. I do think the Cardinals are going to compete for the playoffs. Maybe knock off one of Atlanta, New Orleans, or Green Bay, Minnesota, whichever one has injuries. I think Arizona is going to sneak into the playoffs. So what do you guys think about Arizona and Tennessee?
Yeah, so Arizona, the baseline that we mentioned based on the past few years' rating, we had them at 17th. I think our final rating for them is 22nd. The major down point for them is the draft adjustment. They don't have a lot of maturing draft talent coming. They do have a good QB. They're one of the biggest QB adjustments that we made this year in terms of improvement at the quarterback position compared to previous years. So I think that, like you said, Bradford is going to be a huge improvement there.
I think a lot of people forget how good he was before he got injured. Like, he was no MVP candidate or anything, but he's so much better than Drew Stanton. Yeah.
Yeah. We have them as with the third highest improvement this year in the quarterback position. First is the Browns. They're head and shoulders above everyone. And then the Texans and then the Cardinals are third in our QB improved play adjustment. I was looking at the market before the call. It looks like we still have Arizona slightly higher than the market does. So
I know I'm alone on the Cardinals one, but I'm definitely a believer in the Cardinals. I want it on record. I have the Cardinals going to the playoffs.
Yeah, we're prepared to bet this one, Bobby, with you.
Yeah.
This will be the one like our Patriots last year. I think we're both high on Arizona compared to the consensus.
It doesn't look like you guys have anything too contrarian based on these projections here. You've got Houston and Baltimore making the wild card, and then the 4 divisional teams. I think almost everyone would agree. Patriots, Steelers, Jags, Chargers. I've actually got the Chargers going to the Super Bowl. Tags, who do you have going to the Super Bowl out of the AFC?
So mine out of the AFC is the Jags. I mean, Blake Bortles can really screw that up. Like, he's someone who's quarterback that obviously holds back that team. But I think if the offensive line stays healthy, if Leonard Fournette stays healthy, I believe that defense can carry them through. It's kind of like going back to the whole 85 Bears thing where Jim McMahon was not a great quarterback, but he figured out what he had to do to win, and the Bears defense kind of carried him through. Where it's like you go to the early 2000 Ravens. You look when Joe Flacco won a Super Bowl. Granted, he played really well in the playoffs that year, but his defense was truly elite. I think elite defense is often forgot about, and Jacksonville, I have them versus the Saints in the Super Bowl, so that's where I'm going this year.
They would have been Jacksonville would have been in the Super Bowl last year if they wouldn't have been able to review that call, but they couldn't review the fumble call, and that cost them the Super Bowl. I think a lot of people forget about that they were really one botched call away from going to the Super Bowl. I just look at their strength of schedule last year, and it was by far the easiest in the NFL. I think they take a step back, and Tennessee takes a step forward. It was only a 1-game difference in the standings, too, so...
Bobby, I'm just impressed with Tags whipping out the 30-plus-year-old NFL team comparison right there.
It's the last dominant defense that I could recall. Well, the Ravens. That's why I brought the Ravens too.
Nah, I was reminded a little bit more of the '65 Houston Oilers, but we could go with the '85 Bears.
So, Tags, you said that you've got Jacksonville and New Orleans.
That's correct.
I could definitely see New Orleans. Now, I've got Green Bay just because Aaron Rodgers. Anyone as good as Aaron Rodgers could carry a team to the Super Bowl. And, their defense isn't all that great. But it can happen any year with a quarterback like that. So
that's where I'm at. I mean, the Packers defense just isn't good enough. Losing 2 linebackers before the start of the season doesn't help. But the Saints defense finally has come around.
it's so good. Top 5 in the NFL.
And they have a great coach, whereas Mike McCarthy's not. So
Yes. Yeah, you're right about that.
that's where I'm at. That's why I have the Saints actually winning the Super Bowl.
So it looks like you guys have got Eagles and Patriots again. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's super exciting on the limb pick there.
I mean, to be fair though, and there's a lot of kind of clustering going on there.
I mean, it's extremely close. Like you guys have got the Eagles, the Vikings, the Saints, and the Rams all between 6.8 and 8.1% chance of winning the Super Bowl. So that's pretty close.
Yeah, it's a big free for all in the NFC.
Yeah, NFC's like tough division. That's what I'm saying. I just wanted it to be known that I don't even think the Bears are going to make the playoffs, but I do think they're going to be like a 9-7 team.
Okay. Yeah. All right, man. Well,
9-7 and missing the playoffs is a tough projection to hit.
Yeah, the NFC is just too tough. And well, the division they play in too, because Minnesota and Green Bay come in from there. That's
man, that NFC North is nasty. The AFC South is pretty solid too. It's nothing like the AFC East though, where they might have 3 teams finish with under 5 wins. Those Miami and the Jets and the Bills are so awful. Man, they've got to be 3 of the worst 5 teams in football. Patriots just every single year just pound on these teams, and they never get any better. All right, guys, let's move on over to NFL Week 1 game projections. And the way I want to do this here, Tags, is we just each give our 2 most confident picks against the spread. I'm going to let you go first with your number 2 pick, and then we'll get to your number 1 in a second.
all right. Yeah, I mean, I said it last night on Twitter. I was going through the games and kind of looking at the spreads, and the Rams were at giving 4.5 points to the Raiders. Granted, they're in the road. This is a primetime game. There's a lot of reasons why people would say that you want to stay away from the Rams, but I'm not doing it. I don't see any way that John Gruden puts this now the oldest team in the NFL together to beat one of the youngest teams in the NFL that just added significant talent to the roster. So the Rams over Oakland, it looks like the line might be up to 5. So that would be one of them. And I also would love to take the Chargers giving 3 points at home to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Me too. And I'm looking at their model. The Chargers, that was my number 1 pick. I'm looking at their model, and they disagree with us here. They think the Chiefs have a better chance of covering the spread. I think the Chiefs are going to be a disaster this year with Mahomes. Their defense is dreadful. Now, granted, they've got some weapons. Mahomes is going to pile up the touchdowns, but the turnovers in this game are going to be, I think, on the Chargers' side. So, I don't know. I mean, like they said, turnovers are very volatile, and so there's definitely a scenario where the Chiefs win here. I just think the Chargers at home, I guess they don't have much of a home advantage in Los Angeles. That's my number 1 pick, though. Is there one that you guys wanted to share here?
Well, I guess our 2, we'd say, first of all, the one I'd point out is piggybacking on Tags there. So the Rams -5. Right now, I guess I put as our number 2. I mean, obviously, you would have much preferred to get that at -3, but all of our underlying models still favor the Rams, even at 5, and that's not too common to see. It's about 55% confidence overall for us, and so we would stick with that one, and then. The other one I guess we'd put out there is the Jets +6.5. So it looks like that's our most confident pick of Week 1. The one on Kansas City is kind of an interesting one in that there's actually a little bit of a discrepancy there. There's not full agreement on our models here. We do have Kansas City as the overall pick. But it's not the consensus pick of all of our underlying models. And then also our preseason ratings, kind of the ratings that we put together for every team that drive the season projections that you guys and David were just discussing actually do favor the Chargers against the spread in this one. We're still in the process of we've been doing preseason ratings and now for roughly 5 or 6 years. So we actually currently don't incorporate our preseason power ratings into the models that we use to predict against the spread, but it's something where we're gathering data still and watching how they do. And, and once we have enough data and if we're convinced that there's a sort of positive predictive signal coming from our preseason ratings, we will eventually incorporate those into the spread predictions on our site. Right, we haven't yet, but it's interesting to see that the preseason ratings do favor the Chargers.
My second pick, and we'll use this to close the show here, is that I've got Denver -3 at home against Seattle. First of all, it's a tough place to play in Denver, and Seattle just has, I know I'm going to get a lot of beef on Twitter for this. Bring it, at Bobby Fantasy Pro. They've got Russell Wilson and nobody else. Denver has a very good defense. I think Case Keenum is more than competent. He's got a lot of weapons. Royce Freeman, they just named the starter today. I'm all aboard on Denver -3 over the Seattle Seahawks. And a lot of people aren't going to realize that the Seahawks took a huge step back this year. So I think that's one where the public is going to be, maybe picking Seattle a lot more often. Is that what you guys have as well?
We do have it. It's just close to. It's pretty much a toss-up in terms of confidence. It looks like we got Denver -3 at 51% confidence. So I was just going to say, it's just kind of funny how when people look at spreads, especially, and to hear the reactions of lots of NFL fans, just thinking that some of them are just so far off, and how is it going to be possible? It's like Tags last year with the Giants, and he was incredulous, right? That the Giants were a huge favorite. This I'm ragging on you, but the point being that Vegas is very efficient, right? And it's hard to. I think it's just hard to. If you look at a line as Denver -3. I guess our advice is just like there's almost certainly a good reason for that, right? And if you think it's crazy off, I mean, it still might be the case that there's some that there's some edge in betting a given side, but odds are it's not. There's enough money being bet on the NFL, and bookmakers are smart enough people in managing a business that there's information out there that's causing that to be the line. And the average NFL fan is probably not the one holding the key piece of information that nobody else knows.
One more question to you guys before we get out of here. I wanted to ask you, when you see a line like that, you said that these odds makers, they have information sometimes that we don't as the general public. So if you see a game that you're like, wait a minute, the Jags are playing the Giants, who were really bad last year, and you try and process everything through your mind, and you're like, why is Jacksonville only favored by 2 points, 2.5 points? And are there times that we overthink it, or it's just like an easy pick, or is it like you should really think twice when there's a game like that where you're just like looking at it and the spread really doesn't make sense, but you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see a lot, of I guess more casual bettors doing a lot is effectively not realizing that public information is already baked into the line, right? Like, you hear a lot of when you hear things on television, you're watching a game and somebody comes out with some juicy sounding trend, like the Bears are 20-1 in their last 21 games after X, Y, and Z happens, and this one matches the trend. First of all, that's public information. Typically those, people are a lot of these trends are not really actually predictive. They're just the result of randomness. But people will think that they've kind of, taken public information that's very widely available. They come across it and think that it's some sort of special edge that they have. And that's a very dangerous assumption to make in 99.99% of cases, right? So, the stuff our decision tree model is doing, for example, it makes it hard. Like, we're sort of the analytics geeks, and it's hard when we come on podcasts and people say, well, hey, why do you like the Rams -5, right? But the answer is that we've built these models. They're smarter than us, right? We know they're smarter than us. They're smarter than any sort of processing we could do in our head, at least in terms of data, as far as data is concerned. And they're not that easy to explain, right? The point is, if the reason behind that decision tree model prediction was that, Team X, the Rams are 3-0 in their last 3 games at Oakland. Everybody knows that. That's not, that's already kind of baked into the line. You're not going to be getting any edge making a betting decision on that piece of information. And what the model's trying to do is look for non-obvious and sort of more sophisticated, complicated trend data that's actually meaningful, and hope to get an edge from that, right? And also this is just we obviously specialize in data analysis and data-driven handicapping in terms of the betting side, and we're the first people to admit as well that that's not the only aspect of handicapping. I mean, a lot of edge is also, you guys know from the fantasy world, just staying on top of the final breaking data and injuries and who's going to play or who might be held out, and sort of watching Twitter and factoring all that into your betting decisions as well. There are all sorts of not necessarily straight quantitative approaches to handicapping that if you really want to achieve the, kind of the peak handicapping rate that you need to pay attention to and kind of factor into your process.
That's fair. All right, guys. Well, that's all for today's show. Tell our listeners where they can find you and what all you can do for them.
Yeah, so we same thing as last year that we're doing this year. We put together a page to give all Fantasy Pros podcast listeners special discounts on our Survivor picks and Pick'em contest picks and betting predictions this year. You can just go to teamrankings.com/fantasypros. And you can get, I think it's an extra 10% off all the prices on the site right now. So teamrankings.com/fantasypros.
Cool. Well, guys, it was our pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to come on. Always learn a lot from talking to you guys. And remember, for those of you listening at home, we do have a waiver wire show, so make sure to subscribe on iTunes so you don't miss any of those shows. For Mike Tagliere, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening, and enjoy your football.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.